Badger fans, who won fall camp? Who made the biggest impression, offense, defense, plus some answers to some narrative questions we had. We got one of the best in Badger media on the show today. Locked on Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in and helping us build this community. Really appreciate it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. FanDuel's hooking you up all summer long with boosts or bonus daily. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's jump into the show, and we get the great guests on. We don't waste time. We got Jon McNamara over Rivals joining the show. Been on the show a couple times now. Jon, I wanted to start here. Who won fall camp? Which player do you think made the biggest impact on you?
Probably Tawee Walker. And he's been talked about by just about everyone. So it's not, something that I'm pulling just for my own notebook. But, the expectation when he committed and through the transfer portal from Oklahoma was that, he'd probably be a nice complementary piece to Ches Malusi. And then you could make the argument that he was Wisconsin's best tailback in the spring. And I think you could make the same argument through the practices that people were able to see in the fall, so much so that I think he certainly earned to be in the conversation for Wisconsin's starting running back. Now, will it really matter if it's Malusi or Walker? I think both of those guys are going to get a lot of work, a lot of carries, but just what we were able to see, specifically the stuff I saw in Platteville, I think he was better than I certainly expected him to be. And I think he's going to be a big part of, Wisconsin's offense this year and a big part of Wisconsin's ability, I think, to reestablish the run, being able to run the football effectively. Not only between the tackles with a guy like Walker, but he showed the ability to get out in space, catch the ball a little bit, break away from people. Now, he's not a huge home run threat, but he was just better in every asset or every facet of the game than I would expected when Wisconsin got him through the transfer portal.
I heard someone I was trying to figure out what he runs like or who he reminds me of because I saw him in the week in Platteville. And I was like, he's kind of like PJ Hill, but if he ran like Corey Clement. Like, I don't know if that comp kind of works, but he's a hard one to comp.
Yeah, the stockiness of a PJ Hill, though I don't know if he's as thick as PJ Hill was in that lower half. But runs hard. One of the practices I saw, and Wisconsin put this up on their social media. And they weren't going, tackling guys to the ground, but he pops Ricardo Holman. His helmet goes flying off. I mean, I think that's the kind of, he's like a fire hydrant almost in the way that he runs. But like I said, he can get out there. He can make plays in space. He can make guys miss. But, he's a punishing runner, stockier. And I think he's a very nice kind of complement to Malusi, who does a little bit of, different things with his skill set too. So that portal pickup looks better and better, I think, each day as fall camp wore on. Like I said, I think he's going to be a very big part of this offense, assuming he stays healthy and everything like that.
I know this is a question a lot of people have talked about. I'm curious to get your take on it. How many running backs get significant minutes this year? Significant playing time?
Well, we did a breakdown today on the site, and, there's 6, I think, that can play. Malusi, Walker, like we talked about. Jackson Akers going to have a role on this team. He played, I would say, more of an H-back role than a fullback role, but certainly a guy that I think they're going to have block a little bit for them. A guy that we saw a lot in red zone, specifically towards the goal line, is that power back. He's 6'1", almost 250 pounds, and that showed at times. I don't know that you're going to see him a bunch in the pass game in terms of receiving threat, but hey, 3rd and long, who do you want there protecting the quarterback? It's probably him. Cade Yakameli is a guy that I like his skill set in this offense. I just don't know how many carries or touches it translates to. And then the true freshmen, Darrion Dupree, Dylan Jones, those guys will play. How many snaps, that remains to be seen. But I would even say a guy like Dupree, we saw him take some reps in the return game when they were practicing special team stuff. I think he's such a perfect fit for this offense that he's going to play early. He's going to play in as many ways as you can get him the football. I think he's just a special player. And, you can make an argument for Jones being in that same kind of breath, as you're talking there too. So I think they got 6. I don't know how you balance out 6 guys, though, in terms of, a football game that's 70, 80 plays on offense.
I don't think you can, right? I agree with you on every one of those guys. I thought Yak showed flashes. He catches the ball well. He's a well-built athlete. I kind of feel like they're going to want to get those freshman running backs carries because next year this room could look a lot different. You want to get them ready. We do live, I hate to say it, but in a portal area where you want to show the young guys are going to play. I almost wonder if that all works to Yakimel's detriment there.
Potentially. It's going to be tough to keep Dupree and Jones off the field. And like I said, specifically Dupree because of his skill set. I don't know that they'll line him up at receiver, but he's a guy that you can get creative with. I think he brings something a little bit different than the rest of those backs that you talked about. There's only so many carries that can go around. It's a great problem to have, but a guy like Yakimelli could be on the outside looking in. We don't know what's going to happen over these 2 weeks, that things have been kind of shut down. I do like what he can do. He's a decent fit in what I think Phil Longo wants to do. He's another guy that has been used in the return game too. Maybe he could be there on kickoffs. I don't know about the punt return, but it's tough when you have that many scholarship guys, and they already moved Nate White. So it's a tough room. It's going to be interesting to see how these carries divvy out. But, if you've watched previous seasons, if you're a Wisconsin fan, or if you just watch college football, guys are going to go down and they're going to need guys to step up. So, 6 might seem crowded right now, but that room could very well turn to 4 or 3, based on injuries and just the grind of a full college football season.
Give me a defensive player that won fall camp or one of the guys that won fall camp on the defensive side.
I would say a guy like Max Lofi, who was able to put together a healthy spring and now a healthy fall camp, and a guy that I think a lot of people, and I might put myself in this category, had kind of written off only because of the injuries and him not being able to take part in fall and spring practices and big chunks of seasons. So for him to be there in the spring, like I said, and again in the fall, and kind of solidify that slot corner position, I think it's one of the better stories of this offseason for a guy that's, a fifth-year guy, has battled through some stuff and is right now a projected starter. And that's allowed them to, put Austin Brown back to the traditional safety role that he played. He played some nickel last year, specifically against LSU. A guy like RJ Delancey, who I think a lot of people, myself included, had pegged to play in the slot. He's playing more boundary now. I think a lot of that is because you have someone in Lofi who the staff feels like can eat up a lot of snaps for them at that, that nickel position for them.
You've been doing this for a while. I'm not calling you old. I'm calling you experienced. How should Badger fans feel heading into this year? I feel like the spectrum's all over the map. There's people that are cautious because they were let down last year. There's people who see all the excitement with the linebackers, the running backs, and Van Dyke's look better. Tough schedule, but we're better. Like Renfro's bad. It feels like Badger fans have no idea how to feel. Like, how should they feel?
Well, the feeling that I get from Wisconsin fans, and being on our message board, being on Twitter way too often, is that cautious approach, because last year everything was the biggest, the best, the greatest, and it was a dud. I mean, it really was. And the schedule was weak, and the offense wasn't what you wanted it to be. The defense, they were meshing the good with the good, and it didn't turn out to be much. So I don't blame fans to be cautious about this team, to be cautious about every practice report that comes out, to be cautious about any position that seems like it's elevating. For me personally, this team is better than the 2023 version of Wisconsin. And I don't think that's an argument. I don't think that's hyperbole or a big stretch at all. But this schedule is night and day different than what Wisconsin went up against last year. So I'm not the first to point this out, but this could be, and I think is, a better football team. But the record may not reflect that when the dust settles come December. So, I think they're going to be opportunities for them to show people if they think, the AP poll is wrong or people are doubting them. There are plenty of opportunities on this schedule to show the world that they're a really good football team. But I don't know. There's just so many challenging games on the schedule that the record may not reflect truly the progress that Luke Fickell and his group has made from year 1 to year 2.
Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Ibotta. Listen, summer's expensive. Kids are expensive. Life is expensive. Expensive things are expensive, and kids know they're expensive. Summer, flip-flops, barbecues, vacations, trips to the beach, toys, birthdays, etc., etc., etc. Back to school. Oh my gosh, it's expensive out there, guys and gals. Listen, Ibotta is here for you. Ibotta is an app that gives you cash back on stuff you're already buying. Let's TiVo that back. Cash back on stuff you're already buying. There's no downside. Average Ibotta user gets $256 back per year just by doing the things you normally do. That's enough to buy a Melvin Gordon signed jersey. Right now, Ibotta is offering you $5 for free for just trying Ibotta. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store, Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. College football listeners, we are back. College football is back. Locked On has got you covered. There is a giant Locked On preview, live season preview, 7 p.m. on Tuesday, August 20th. Let Locked On guide you through the start of the college football season. Go check out the streaming Locked On College 24/7 YouTube channel on Amazon, Fire TV, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Impossible to say I know this, but what do you say this team does against last year's schedule?
They probably don't lose to Indiana. I'd start with there. Probably don't lose to Northwestern. So I think there's at least a 2-game improvement there, if not 3. I don't think this group is beating Ohio State, but look, every other game on that schedule is manageable. I don't want to say, well, this team would be a one-loss team last year. I mean, that's tough to say, but you don't expect them to lose to teams like Indiana and teams like Northwestern. So this team is better. I don't know what the record's going to reflect in terms of the progress made.
You get more social media interaction after a bad loss or a great win.
Oh, bad loss. Some of the true gut-wrenching heartbreakers from a Wisconsin fan standpoint. I mean, you just dread going back to that message board, but it's healthy. It's good for those people to get those emotions out in a safe, I guess, relatively safe place out there. But I mean, a good win is a good win, but people love to talk about the bad losses and the close losses and the unacceptable losses far more than they love to talk about a great victory. And look, if you've been a Wisconsin fan, at least in recent years, you've had far more to complain about than you've had to celebrate. And that's just as the honest fact.
Let me throw a couple more of my big winners at you. I want to see if you agree or disagree, or what your thoughts on these guys are. I thought Chris Brooks Jr. at receiver for kind of where he came in, and again, that's not to say he's going to be one of the top 4 guys this year, but it felt like he was more of an afterthought. I thought he played really well in the practices I was able to see. I think he's going to find some type of role. I like the physical size. I like the hands. What were your thoughts on him?
Especially a guy that was recruited by the previous coaching staff. And I think anyone who falls in that category, just the lens is different, right? A guy who was recruited by Paul Chryst may not fit into what the offense wants to do under Luke Fickell. And Brooks is unique in his body type and, just the way that he plays that wide receiver position. We've seen glimpses before, but then, a little bit like Lofi, he's just missed these large chunks of time due to injury. So another guy who it's good to see, 1, that he's healthy, and then 2, producing in fall camp. That's a receiver room that has a lot of bodies and a lot of guys I think can contribute. But look, it wouldn't be surprising in that 2 deep if someone like him found their way in, only because like Quincy Burrows has missed time. Mm-hmm. And he, I guess I would just call him limited in terms of what he was doing in the big 11-on-11 stuff. So if a guy like Chris Brooks Jr. squeaked in there, or a guy like Tyrell Henry squeaked in there, it certainly wouldn't surprise me. I know that a lot of fans have kind of advocated him moving to the tight end position because you can make an argument that's one of the thinnest positions on the roster. But, it'll be interesting to see if they can make his skill set work in kind of a crowded room at wide receiver right now.
Yeah, I think the thing with the move to the tight end spot, I've heard that and seen that as well, obviously. And you can draw the obvious connection there with the bigger physical receiver and the lack of depth in one spot. I don't think they would use him much differently as like a flex tight end with his skill set or a jumbo receiver.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's not going to help you out a ton in the blocking game. So, I mean, you could call him a receiver, but you could call him a tight end. He might not be doing anything different than he is right now. So it's just probably some semantics right there.
Yep, I think that's what it is. How about on defense? I wrote down Tyler Jancy. You're talking about kind of another guy who, in that inside linebacker room, it was who's going to play. You got Thomas, you got Allegro, you got Tackett, you got Chaney. I thought Jancy balled out and set himself up for a role going forward, maybe next year.
Yeah, and Mike Tressel mentioned 5 inside linebackers potentially playing this year. Not to get off on a tangent there, but all these position coaches have talked about, we want to play this many guys. I would really just like to see that play out. I mean, last year, Jack McNamara talked about we're going to play 8, 9 offensive linemen, and that didn't turn out to be the case. But I digress. But you have 5. You have Jaheim Thomas, Jake Chaney. Those are your no doubt starters. Tackett Curtis, Christian Allegro, and really, I think that battle, like you talked about with Jancy, I think Jancy is battling with Tackett Curtis, a guy who more heralded, a guy coming from USC, a guy who obviously everyone is probably pretty familiar with his recruiting story, but he's made that a competition. He's made that conversation be, we have 5 linebackers instead of what just going into fall camp I anticipated would be 4 with the guys that we mentioned. But Jancy is now in that conversation, like you talked about. That room's going to turn over a little bit next year. Maybe he's a guy that's, not just in the 2 deep, but maybe he's pushing a little bit for those first team reps.
Another guy from your list, maybe if you have another one, offense or defense, somebody else who you thought really won in fall.
In the fall, to go back to the defense, I think I would just say I feel better about the defensive line than I did 4 weeks ago. And 2 guys I think are certainly trending in the right direction are Brandon Lane and Elijah Hills, the 2 guys that they got through the portal. Lane comes in the summer, so he's just got the fall camp. I think he's certainly going to be in the rotation, a guy that's going to be able to eat up a lot of snaps for you, and a guy that can flash a little bit. He might have the most upside from that group right now. And then Hills, I thought, had a very quiet spring, but started to flash, right in the couple practices that were open to the media before things shut down. So, those are 2 guys at a position group that is not believed to be a strength that I think are certainly trending in the right direction right now.
Well, yeah, that was one of my narrative questions. So let's just jump into that. You hit on that one. So several questions we had coming into fall, right? One of them was defensive line depth is a question. Defense line's an issue. It feels like, from what you just said, you feel at least better about it. Not that it's necessarily completely solved or that it's an upper tier Big Ten unit. I guess I would reframe the question is it good enough? Like, is it good enough this year for the Badgers to win 8 or 9 games?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for you, but I think the feeling is that unit is better than maybe they anticipated, maybe better than they thought going into fall camp. And Luke Fickell kind of alluded to that as well. Now, that's another position group where can you play 6 guys there? You have Kurt Neal, you have James Thompson, and you feel very good about those 2. Ben Barton, a veteran, he's played a lot of Big Ten football. He kind of is what he is, but I think he's a guy that's going to be in the rotation. Hills and Lane are going to play, I think. Cade McDonald is maybe the 6th. Then you have a guy like Dylan Johnson, who I don't want to say has been turning heads, but he's been talked about throughout the fall. And maybe he's not a guy that you see in the first 4 games, but in the middle of that Big Ten season when, there's some guys going down and there's a little bit of movement, maybe he starts to elevate a bit and then he's in the rotation. So I think if they can play 6, that'll be a good thing. That unit is never going to be a strength this year. I'm not to say that's not going to be a strength down the road and, you're 3 or 4 in Fickell, but this year it's just not going to be a strength. But if they can be C+ and do their jobs, do their assignments, and let those linebackers work and let that secondary flow, I think this defense can take another big jump this year as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's check in with our sponsors for the day, FanDuel. Everybody knows about FanDuel. They're awesome, but FanDuel continues to change it up, right? They mix it up like a crafty left-hander. You don't know if you're going to get the curve, the slurve, the slider, the change, the spitball, or the 87-mile-an-hour fastball in the black. That's what FanDuel is here for, America's #1 sportsbook. They have a great new offer. From right now, capital NOW, to September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market NFL football game for free. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Major League Baseball, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. You cannot go wrong. FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, let's get back into the show. And with that defense, let's talk secondary. I find it. I'm curious. Let me, even before I get to the secondary question I was going to ask, I want to know, as a veteran who's covered this stuff for a long time, how do you parse watching practice in terms of? I thought there were moments when the first string offense going up against the first string defense, the receivers couldn't get open. They just couldn't get separation. I thought Van Dyke actually did a pretty good job of buying time, not forcing throws. Is that great coverage, or is that a combination of great coverage and receivers struggling to separate? How do you parse that when you see it?
Yeah, I would start by saying that early on in camp, the defense is usually ahead of the offense. I think that's very common. But as things kind of roll on, I think that's one thing that maybe people like myself got caught up in last year of, these receivers are making all these big time plays and, they're just airing it out. But then you come to find out that they were beating some guys that were kind of had a foot out the door through the transfer portal. So, but I think one thing that we did see this fall, there was a lot of good on good, a lot of first team offense versus first team defense. And look, if you're a glass half full guy, when they're making those plays on offense, you say that, that's great. They're moving the football. The wide receiver's doing well. But then, on defense, when the defense is making plays, you can kind of say the same thing. So it's tough, right? I mean, when you're in those situations, someone's going to come out on top. Someone's not going to come out on top. That someone's going to come out on the bottom. So it's just kind of how you look at it. I guess I look more for the quarterbacks making the right decisions and things looking crisp. And fall camp's another opportunity for them to take chances too. So if you throw the ball downfield in fall camp, sometimes the coaches want you to do that. I mean, interception doesn't really matter when you're in that setting. You want to push and you want to, kind of allow those receivers to run their routes and those plays to develop. So, when you see the offense taking a bit more chances, that's the opportunity to do that. So, it's tough to say, exactly what you're seeing because you're seeing Wisconsin on Wisconsin, but I would start to, like I said in the beginning, offense is usually a little bit behind the defense, but things kind of even out as fall camp goes on. And then we always get kicked out right when that happens to not see how it finishes off.
Well, and I think it's a really good point you made. That's something Paul Chris used to talk about. Obviously, he wanted his quarterbacks to take some chances, and he wanted his quarterbacks to see what they could get away with. Mm-hmm. In that sense, I thought Tyler Van Dyke coming in as a reputation for being a little inconsistent, maybe putting the ball in harm's way. I thought he was exceptionally calm and reliable with the football for the most part during practice, whereas Locke actually felt like was maybe a little more erratic with his decision making.
Yeah, and Tyler has the arm to make up for maybe being a half second behind or maybe not seeing something as quickly as a guy like Locke does because like he said, he does have that arm strength and he does have the experience. So, those things certainly work in his favor. Look, if I think he has NFL arm talent. Can he get comfortable enough in this offense and can he avoid those kind of back-breaking mistakes that we saw at times when he was at Miami? The arm has never been the question, and I think it's been a lot of other things with Tyler Van Dyke. This has always kind of felt like it was his job, even going back to the spring. I think he's taken a big playbook leap from the spring to the fall. He seems more comfortable, not only with the receivers, but with what Phil Longer wants to do and just the offense in general. So, all those things have led him to be Wisconsin's starting quarterback. I think he has a chance to lead this team if he can avoid some of the things that we saw at Miami because the arm talent's there. And look, he's not a dual threat, big time running quarterback, but when the pocket breaks down, he's going to be a guy that can get you first downs. And that's something that maybe hasn't been talked about enough or written about enough, but it's tough to gauge that in the fall camp setting. The pocket breaks down, you have a guy touch him, is it a sack? Does the play go on? But I think when they're, in a live game setting, he's going to be able to make some plays with his feet to move the chains. And that's another aspect of his game that I think is a little bit ahead of Braden Locke.
Let me ask you this: how concerned are you about offensive line depth? Like, is that your
Very,
biggest concern? Yeah.
very,
Okay.
very concerned. I mean, some of the Madison practices, Riley Mahlman was, I would say, just limited, and you saw Kevin Haywood getting snaps. And then the following day, you saw Barrett Nelson return, and he was getting some of those snaps. You feel, if everyone's healthy, I think very good about that starting five. But 6, 7, and 8, you just don't know. I think JP Benchall makes the most sense as the next interior guy up. Barrett Nelson or Kevin Haywood maybe is the next tackle. That injury to Leighton Nelson hurts quite a bit because I think he would have been your third tackle this year, or a guy that, look, is probably versatile enough to play guard if you needed him to. So again, I really like the starting five. The depth beyond that, though, is a big question mark. I don't know that you want a guy like Kevin Haywood, for as talented as he is and for as high of a ceiling as many people think he has. That's a tough task to ask a guy like that to potentially play against Alabama in week 3. So that group has to stay healthy. And I think in the opportunities that you do have in games that, if you're a Wisconsin fan, are hopefully trending in the right direction, it's going to be crucial to get that next wave as many snaps as they possibly can to get their feet wet, because they're going to be, more than likely someone's going to have to play beyond those top 5, this season, because it was kind of an anomaly with the way that they stayed on the offensive line.
Yeah, I think those first 2 games, if you can get a bit of a lead, you can not only get those guys reps, but it's not just about getting the young guys reps, right? It's about getting the critical pieces that cannot get hurt out of the game in the third and fourth quarter, right? If you can, and you can also you can get those freshman running backs reps, Xavier Lucas. Like, there's a lot of young pieces on this team that need those reps. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, Jack Nelson, Riley Mahlman. I mean, those guys don't need to play 70 snaps a game.
Yes.
They really don't, and they shouldn't have last year. They had guys that I think they could have rotated. So if those, I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out. Coaches, I think they never want to be in a situation where they feel like the game could slip away, even if you're up 4 touchdowns. But I don't see why, like I said, guys like Nelson or Mahlman play these huge amount of snaps in games that are comfortably in the favor of Wisconsin.
Yeah, 100% agree there. I asked you this last time, and you said, well, wait until this player commits. I said, do you think the 24 or 25 offensive line classes, which was the more impressive recruiting all? And you said, well, let's wait and see if Logan commits. I said, okay. So now that we have that kind of group there, I don't want to ask you who's going to be better, but just from a recruiting haul standpoint, like what's the more impressive haul?
Yeah, it was Hardy Watts at last, that fifth guy.
Was Watts was the last one, right?
Yeah, Hardy Watts I guess the cherry on top. Well, look, the early returns on this 2024 group have been very good. There's 3 guys that are kind of fighting for that in a spot in the 2 deep. You have Kevin Haywood. Again, it kind of seems like the sky's the limit for this kid. A likely starter next year, I would say. Then Colin Cubberly, who, not the forgotten guy of that class, but certainly wasn't the most heralded. He's fighting for that start, job at right guard in that 2 deep. Emerson Mandel, who a lot of people had pegged to play in the interior, he's taken some second team snaps at right tackle. So I mean, that group, at least early on, has been very good. But then that 2025 class, a guy like Hardy Watts, I mean, man, he's a really good football player. I would, from those 10, I would probably put him 2 behind Kevin Haywood if you were to stack them all up and just kind of, grade them out from where they were in high school and, obviously when they get to Wisconsin. But I don't know. You could really make an argument for either group, and I probably wouldn't argue too hard the other way, because I think they got 2 pretty special classes put together. And that's a position that Wisconsin, if they can avoid it, I don't think they want to continue to go to the portal. I mean, that's why you take 10 in 2 years, 10 scholarship guys, because I think they really want to rely on this next wave of talent to keep them out of the portal and to just build that position to what it was, in the last 30 years at Wisconsin, to get it up back to that standard. I think they got the right 2 guys now in charge to get them there. But these 10 guys that they got 2024 and 2025, are a lot is going to be put on their shoulders to likely play early and then reestablish everything they want that position to get back to.
A couple more questions. I don't want to keep you for too long, but I do want to give absolutely everyone the opportunity. Where can they find what you do, where you're at on social media? Obviously, your platform, I think all Badger fans know, but how can people find you?
Yeah, BadgerBlitz.com is the best place. We got a nice deal going on, 60% off a year-long subscription. We get you right into college football season. And the biggest thing that we do is recruiting, and that's going to heat up. And guys are going to be on campus for unofficial visits, maybe an official visit or two. We'll see. But now's a really good time. And then you can find me on Twitter or X McNamara Rivals. Hit me up. I'll tell you about the promotion and get you locked in and going on BadgerBlitz.com.
Do it. And we have his Twitter account right here on the show if you're watching on YouTube. If not, it'll also be in the show notes. I asked you this before the show. Over under of the upperclassmen in the secondary that played this year. So not Xavier Lucas, who's a freshman. How many NFL draft picks are there over under 2.5?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say under, the guys you're talking about, Ricardo Hallman. I think that this likely could be his last season. Same for Hunter Wooler, both true seniors. I shouldn't say that about Hallman. He's a redshirt junior, but, Hunter Wooler's played, the first 3 years, didn't redshirt. So, both those guys were the same class. You would expect likely to be in the NFL after this season. And then, a guy like Xavier Lucas, look, he's measurables wise, I think that he's going to make a lot of NFL teams take a long look at him. And then from everything we've kind of heard is that, no player took a bigger leap from last year to this year than Forkering. And, he's added the good weight. He's kept the speed. He's looked good in camp. So, it would not surprise me if he put himself in that NFL draft conversation, which is quite a story from a guy, obviously wasn't playing at a Power 4 level just 2 years ago. So I would say under, but that's a very conservative under right now. I think Forkering could put together a good year. And look, an NFL team will take a flyer on a guy who's 6'1" and almost 200 pounds to play cornerback, if they think that he could pan out for them.
Yeah, I kind of think it's going to be over, but I could be buying the hype. This is again where he gets into fall camp and exactly how much do you buy and not buy. But I thought he looked really good. And to your point, the measurables are there, and I think that's one of those spots where NFL teams, they just look for measurables to some degree. I mean, we remember Desmond Southworth he was a 3rd round pick, despite I don't think the greatest film, not a corner, he was a safety of this. But I think the measurables, if he runs well, I think we'll get him there. And then you're talking about 3 NFL guys in a secondary for the Badgers, like that plus depth. Lofi, you talked about, is one of the biggest winners of the camp, plus a guy like Xavier Lucas nipping on their heels, plus Decluna. Yeah. Like, you start to say this is like a really, really legit secondary, which leads me to my next question. Pass rush. They brought the linebackers in. Do you think that fixed it? Like, based on what you saw in camp, do you think the pass rush is quote unquote fixed this year?
Well, yeah, I would say, yeah, the closest thing that you could say to fix. I'd like to see it play out in the game, but look, Leon Lowry, John Pius, those guys are huge upgrades. And then a guy like Jaheim Thomas, the versatility that he brings, he could be a guy that 3rd down. Okay, we're a little thin at outside linebacker. Let's put him on the edge and just have him go get to the quarterback. And I think you're going to get a little bit from Jake Chaney too. He looked good rushing from the interior. I mean, not a guy that's going to play on the edge, but he blew up some plays where he is coming with a head of steam, right up through the center, right up through one of the guards. So he could provide a little bit of that pop too on the interior. But I like the guys they got. I think Pius is probably the best pass rusher from that group. I don't know what his sack numbers will be, but they got to be better than what they produced last year. I mean, they were, sacks isn't the be all end all stat, but they just could not get to the quarterback last year. And again, I don't want to say problem solved. They're completely fine, but they certainly have put forth the effort to fix that problem. I like the guys that they have in that room right now, and that you expect it to be an upgrade there, very much so.
All right, last question here, and this will put you on the spot a tick because I didn't prep you for this one. We did a recent show where we talked about penny stocks. This is not an investing show. I'm not going to ask you for stock advice, Which Badger do you think is the penny stock you'd invest in? So somebody who is really far off the radar, but you think either this year could play an outsized role, or in 2 or 3 years, people would be like, where'd that dude come from? I'll give you a couple names. We thought of. Mine was Langdon Nordgaard. I kind of like it as a preferred walk-on, 6'4", 5", former track kid. He actually made some plays in practice. I think that's a penny stock. Somebody mentioned Chris Brooks Jr. I don't know if that's a penny stock anymore, if that hype is blown up a little bit. Garrison Soliday, based on one incredible practice in Platteville, but he was awesome for that stretch. Angel Toombs is a guy, you look at a 6'5", 230-pound kid. Curious, anybody that you would say, yeah, that's a penny stock for me on the Badgers roster?
Those are all guys that you're definitely buying low on. I feel like any scholarship guy might not fall in that category. Man, that's a tough one. Nordgaard, I don't know. It's tough. He has an interesting skill set. A guy that, I think at first glance with his measurables, you probably think he's a tight end, but I was talking to him during his recruitment, they said wide receiver all the way, and that's where he's been playing. That's a loaded room, and it seems like it'll be like that for a while. But look, I'd put a penny on him and see if I can cash out in 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't feel terrible about that. But like I said, it's tough to pick scholarship guys because you've written about them so much, you talk about them so much. So what about a guy like Owen? I know that he's only got a year or 2 left, but I think he's flashed at times. I don't know how high his ceiling is, but look, I think he could be a good football player for Wisconsin. And maybe if that position has some injuries, that he can come in and play a little bit for them.
Yeah, you could see like a Leo Musso type of a career arc there if the depth wasn't. I think the depth on this team is the problem for some of those guys. Yeah. It's gotten better, but yeah, I like the Arnett pick. That's a good one. That's why we get John on.
Yeah, that was my big call of the year. Owen Arnett, All-American.
Jon McNamara joined the show. John, as always, thank you so much for joining on, making us smarter. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
On Wisconsin, and thank you for joining Locked On Badgers. We will talk tomorrow.